I'm Ashton Addison from EventChain for Investment Pitch Media and FinTech News Network. And today on Blockchain Interviews, we have Alex McDougall, the Chief Investment Officer of Bicameral Ventures. Alex, welcome to the show once again. It is great to see you, and thank you for being here.
Absolutely. Third time is a charm, as you mentioned. This is going to be fun. There's a lot of really interesting things going on today, and excited to talk about some of it.
Definitely. Yeah, the markets are very crazy since we last spoke. A lot of crazy economic events happening and pivots to many businesses. If we could dive a little bit into Bicameral Ventures, could you first start by giving a background on what industries have you been focused primarily on for investment with Bicameral Ventures?
Sure. So we formed Bicameral about 2 years ago and started out really as a blockchain-focused venture fund. And we came by that by my partner and I's really deep focus on this idea of digital integrity and digital trust and just how people trust and interact with each other in general. And one of our big points of our thesis is there's this trillion or multi-trillion dollar trust gap that sort of evolved in the world by us not being able to trust each other directly on transactions, how they settle, how they close, how they get taxed, how they get accounted for. But more importantly, everything that we do digitally and all of the digital interactions that we have are all extremely heavily mediated, and we can no longer trust who's holding our data, who owns our digital persona, who's on the other side of a transaction, why we're seeing certain content, and really there's this massive lack of integrity in our essentially our digital system today. And so we set about to organize a venture capital fund around providing capital towards closing that trust gap. That's really our big picture mandate and idea. And so blockchain, obviously, great technology to do that, but there's millions on blockchain today, and to really tackle these gigantic problems of the world, you need billions on it. And the tech isn't there yet to do that today. It's not infrastructural enough. It's not smooth enough to do. It doesn't have the components that need to be leveraged within it, and it needs heavy integration with AI and IoT as well, the other converged technologies that we think about. And so really there's these suite of connective solutions and this infrastructure, this stack type of investing, all of which needs to happen to essentially create the solutions that make adoption of these types of integral, trust-focused technologies a no-brainer instead of something where you need to actually make a choice and really understand the tech to make it work. So that's really one of our key mandates is both from the investment side, and now we're starting actually to get more into operating and starting a few of our own projects to start a little bit earlier in the story and find the users where they are today, and then evolve a lot of that trust and digital integrity back end into the technologies that already have a lot of users today. So roundabout answer, but Bicameral does a lot of different things and really tries to organize capital around solving these big picture problems of the future, Alan, today.
Yeah, and that's great that you've got into it so early, Alex, because a lot of these things that you've been focusing on with Bicameral are now more coming into the light now that the lockdown has moved everyone to virtual all the time. A lot of in-person conferences are now being virtual, and communications are all going through different service providers of different communications applications that nobody really reads the fine print of the terms of service when they start these applications. They just click go and they're ready to go and just trust that their information is secure. So with the coronavirus pandemic happening, has that affected your vision, or at least the timeline of your vision for how all of this is playing out?
It's a great question, and I hate to describe anything about this pandemic and this crisis as an opportunity. But I think Snowden put it well, and he did an interview with Vice recently where he said it's like the world has just a mental sabbatical for a little while, where everybody can sort of stop and just activate some higher functions, not be quite as busy and minute to minute focused on what they're doing at every second and hyper scheduled and all of sort of the autopilot that we go through our regular lives on a regular basis. Everybody's got a bit of time to be forced into just being quiet and thinking about paradigms for a little while. And you mentioned it that right now we don't have any way to physically connect with each other in general. And oftentimes the highest value interactions that we have are reserved for physical connections. Closing deals, visiting with family, romantic interactions. Those are all things that happen physically, and we can't do those in actual physical spaces right now. So all of the things that we're used to doing physically, we're now being forced into doing virtually. And those are the highest value pieces of data about us. And we have this kind of consumer data paradigm today that's massively based on extraction of our habits and our preferences and our digital personas. And now we've just created the highest value interactions for that data to be mined. And so we're always on about, and we're always talking about how we need to fix this data paradigm for one of extraction to one of shared data and self-sovereign data, minimum data sharing requirements, and a whole bunch of other pieces to this next generation data economy that we're trying to build. But essentially, it's become exponentially more important in today's world than it ever has been before. So it's really shined a light for a lot of people on what some of these big challenges are. And where it gets really interesting, and a point I always like to bring up is we're doing this over Zoom right now. And a lot of the challenges, so Zoom took off obviously when this pandemic started, and a lot of the focus was on, Zoom's not actually that private. But most of the focus was around, your Zoom can be Zoom bombed and hacked. And there was an article about if you're running a Mac and you have a passwordless Zoom, they can actually access your rootkit through it, what powers the host has. But a lot of it's around malicious intent. And one of the biggest challenges with our data paradigm today is that it's not actually the malicious intent that really is the challenge. It's the fact that Zoom's whole business model is looking at what's on my screen, looking at where my attention is, and building a data profile around me and you and everybody else who's looking and watching this, and then monetizing that on the back end to advertisers. And that's all laid out in their privacy statement or privacy policy. But that's sort of the secondary point of this business. And there's ways that you can use Zoom. There's ways that you can use most apps that are very private and very safe and very secure. But if everybody does that, then these apps don't exist. There's this fundamental tension between privacy and profit. And unless we fix that paradigm and fix the business models and actually create a new way for data companies and app companies to exist, the more privacy we have either via legislation or via smart choices by consumers, we're going to end up in a completely private and completely empty world of apps. And in today's world where we only have these vehicles to communicate with each other, that's a disaster.
Yeah, great point. And for the everyday people that, they aren't really focused on what's on the back end of their computers. They're just using the applications. They don't really care as long as it works. This doesn't seem like it has been as an important topic as it could be or as it should be. And usually the privacy legislation are by, the top level people putting in some mandate to protect them. Do you think that the people themselves should be speaking up about this and they could make a difference possibly or do you think that they, should more people start caring and bringing this up?
Yeah, so a couple points here, and to your first point, that's exactly right, and I think about it in terms of people take the path of least resistance, and it generally takes something shocking and very direct or a visceral change in situation to really actually change people's habits. And so, in general world, when things are kind of, ongoing and you're going to work every day and you got your family and your friends and your schedule and blah, blah, blah. And then, Google Maps works great. You use it to get places, blah, blah, blah. You know that vaguely it's strange that McDonald's keeps showing up on your route, even though you're not looking for it. And that it happens to know where your house is. But those things aren't really things that sort of jar you out of your paradigm of what works. Now, when you're in a COVID world now, and these things start popping up, like there's a website that's based out of Singapore, where you can see every single COVID case that's in Singapore, click into it, see the age of the person, the nationality of the person, their travel history, where they live, where their contact tracing is, and this entire web, and say, okay, that's good for COVID tracing purposes. Why the hell can I, a random guy in Canada, see that? It's those extremely sort of in your face situations where you finally start to wake up a little bit and say, okay, well, there's a reason all this stuff is free in general. And B, there's this like 90% of the web that I'm just not seeing. I see this very sanitized top 10% up here, but there's all of the actual mechanics and plumbing that's sitting underneath it. So I think you need sort of a catalyst for people to actually start paying attention. But then it's on us to build different tools that actually make it easy for people to operate in a better paradigm. So right now, I'm obviously passionate about this stuff, and so I try and use the right tools, and I try and protect my privacy where I am. But like my web experience is materially worse than if I used Google and Facebook and Instagram and House Party and all of like the premier tools that are out there right now.
Yeah.
I mean, like DuckDuckGo, I love everything that they do, but the search results that I get from them are objectively worse than Google. So it's up to us as well to build better data paradigms. And I think the secret weapon is, it seems daunting to take down Google, but you can build a better data profile than what Google has about you in 10 minutes. If you can access your Facebook data, you can access your LinkedIn data, you can access your Google data, you can access your mobility data, you can add in your own health data, you can know your own preferences. We can create our own digital persona, and then that's what we end up leveraging to advertisers, to governments, to healthcare, to COVID apps. But we share what we want, and we share what actually it needs to be shared on it. But that infrastructure doesn't exist today. I mean, we're involved in a couple of really cool companies, one of which I think you want to talk about a little bit more. That is creating that infrastructure, but it needs to be as simple and as performant as Google is if we're going to get not the million sort of avant-garde neo-privacy hackers that care about this stuff. We want to get grandma to use it because it just gives her better recommendations. And that's when we can really win and change this paradigm. And it's doable because the profile you create when you're creating your own profile, the shared data profile is way better than the extracted data profile. And that's something I'm confident and consistent on, and we just need the mechanisms to make it easy for users to do.
That's great, and that you touched on one of Bicameral's portfolio companies, which I was going to get into next, MetaMe, and focus on building your black box of your personal information, your data, and be able to push that out to providers and service providers when you're using that service, but only allow them to see the information that you provide to them. Now, how big do you see, with a project like MetaMe, how big do you see the industry numbers-wise growing? Is this something that could be a global product quickly, or do you really need, for example, the coronavirus or some other events to really bring privacy to the forefront of people's minds to allow products like this to flourish for your investment?
Yeah, well, it's a great point and a great question, and I think what's great about MetaMe and what also is sort of just such a big picture is that the vision for it is so big. I mean, it's essentially all of the pieces of how the data economy work today, from the architecture of the third-party tracking, from how the actual back office data marketplace works, how real-time bidding and real-time advertising works, how cookies work, like all of that sort of hidden architecture is essentially what's attempting to be rebuilt via this platform of MetaMe. So there's a lot of different pieces to it, but you're exactly right. I mean, so setting COVID aside for a second, I mean, the consumer data market is $1 trillion+ between all of the major players on it and all of the advertising dollars that flow through. And that's really what can be taken down. And if you can build something, and it's not just MetaMe. There's a suite of products and solutions that are doing this. It's never going to be one company that sort of solves a paradigm. But if you can, I mean, Google is one of the most valuable companies in the world right now because it offers instead of a 1% chance that somebody clicks on your ad, buys your product. With Google, it's a 2.5% chance, and just that delta is the most valuable thing that exists. And sorry, those are made up numbers, not exactly right. But if you can, with a better profile, get that to 3.5% and then filter in through all of the mechanisms that already exist on the back end, so all the real-time bidding, like all that stuff's automated, you can essentially roll up the market overnight. You don't need each individual consumer to go and change and do all that stuff. There's a lot of automated infrastructure that if you can put your product in the right place to essentially take advantage of the distribution network that's out there already, you can roll it up overnight. So yes, this is able to become a gigantic style of platform in a very short period of time. because of the nature of the performant data that's being created under it. And we're so starved from an economics perspective for consumer insights, predictability, advertising that works, fraud resistance, all of that stuff. Even, again, setting aside COVID for now, that anything that can move the needle a little bit becomes instantly the most valuable platform that exists. And then add in the COVID side, where we have essentially two terrible options right now. We either have the China model, which is ultimate surveillance. Download this app. We're forcing you to show barcodes wherever you go that govern our mobility. Or the the current American system is a little bit more of non-technologically enabled, to say that lightly. Canada, same idea. But the Google and Apple solution, which is opt-in, so you don't even have the sweeping range of a forced government style of adoption for this type of technology. But also you end up giving your health data to the worst data stewards that we have so far. Google and Apple's a little bit better, but you sort of end up with the tech leading solution is a bad outcome and may not even be an effective outcome if enough people don't opt in. And the totalitarian or ultimate surveillance state regime is also a bad outcome. So we're in a situation where we desperately need sort of this middle lane, which is something that's run and owned and or not owned, but supported and encouraged by governments, but that has this sort of privacy technology built in that's only sharing the minimum amount, only certifying that you have a low COVID risk and not without all the details behind it. This idea of a minimum share platform, and then that a lot of that stuff's backed up by blockchain, that you can trust that data. You don't need to validate the underlying data because you can see the supply chain and know where it came from. So there's a whole bunch of different pieces to that, but it does need these catalysts. And some of it can be commercialization, but some of it can be a global pandemic. And again, it's sad to say that that's an opportunity, but if that's what breaks this data paradigm into one of minimum sharing, private execution environments, self-sovereignty, 360-degree data collection about yourself, blah, 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 then that's a good outcome of all of this carnage that we're living through right now.
Yeah, very interesting. And for the people that are looking to learn more about privacy and protecting their own data, what ways do you suggest? I know we're running out of time a little bit, but if you could give some takeaways for the audience on, are there ways right now that they can get certain applications or use certain methods to help protect their data online?
Yes, absolutely. And a brief plug for myself, I'm going to be doing a long form deep dive into all of this stuff at Consensus Distributed on May 11th, called Data Hygiene 101, Who Owns Your Digital Persona When You Don't? That really goes through in depth a lot of these tools and how to use them, how to see what's actually being governed about you or discovered about you, and then how to protect yourself on it. So essentially, I mean, the short version, I'll run through a couple of tools quick. There's a fantastic app for iPhones called Lockdown that essentially, instead of, there's a lot of apps that block trackers for browsers. So, I mean, the Brave browser is good, DuckDuckGo is good, Ghostery is pretty good. But there's very little that actually goes into the apps that are used on your smartphone as well. So Lockdown sort of reaches into your entire OS and blocks even if you don't block it or turn off some of the data sharing features, it goes in and blocks and turns off some of those data sharing features. So that's super helpful and very informative about what's being blocked and where. But so there's lots of ways to shut down. Where is really interesting is the ways to catalyze and use the existing data. So there's a really cool platform called Loginhood that is a Chrome extension that essentially takes all of your browsing data and then runs the same style of infrastructure, so data management platforms, demand-side platforms, as Google and the advertising networks, except it does it as an agent of you. So it goes out and monetizes your data on your behalf. Now, it's not changing the paradigm, but at least it's putting you in the flow of it and understanding how the value works and all of that stuff. So that's a really cool one as well. DigiMe is an interesting smartphone platform as well. Similar type of idea that you accumulate a bunch of your own data and then use those data packages to power apps within that world. So there's sort of a few different pieces to that. But I mean, the general privacy ones, from just cutting off your data today, Ghostery, Brave browser, those are probably the two best. Loginhood for your phone, Lockdown for your phone, and then Loginhood, DigiMe, and MetaMe for creating this new version of a paradigm. And last thing, because I know we both got to get to go see Tim Draper. There's a really, really, really enlightening website called click. And I won't say too much more about it, but it was sort of my rabbit hole moment when I realized that there's a whole different world out there. And this is one of the best, simplest, easiest, most entertaining and terrifying ways to dive into that world of what's actually happening when you go to a website. So I'll leave it at that for anybody watching.
Yeah, very interesting, Alex. Thank you for all those resources, and you've got me hooked. I'm definitely going to be looking at click right after this. So thank you so much for taking the time to come on the interview. I will leave the links to Bicameral and your talk with Consensus in the description box below, as well as the resources that you provided. And let's follow up in the near future. Thank you so much.
Amazing. Thanks, Ashton. Always a pleasure. We'll talk soon.